All right, so things breaking.
It has been a time. We've been having a lot of difficulty, and by we, I mean me. I think we've got it fixed, but the downside to all of that is that this episode type of all episode types is supposed to be vibes. The vibes are poor right now. The vibes are not ideal at this moment in time.
Wait, what were we talking about again?
I know, right? I don't even remember. It's been so, like, we've been at this for an hour now.
Yep. And we've probably got about 6 minutes worth of audio.
Right.
Which, I mean, standard, we usually record for an hour and 6 minutes is usable.
Sure, but this is actually going to be a tougher edit for our producer, Nikki.
Yeah, I have no idea how we'll have to figure that out.
No, it's going to be great. I'm sure she's going to be happy about that because normally her editing job is, well, that was stupid. Cut that. He's a jackass. That's on the floor. Like,
you know, in retrospect, and I'm not advocating changing the situation, but this is one of those rare instances where having Ted around would have been ideal because she could have A, pushed the work off onto him, or at the very least B, listened to what we handed it and had someone to punch that wasn't one of us.
He was a good punching bag, that Ted.
I'm taking some notes here as we speak.
We need to hire a new intern.
We need another Ted.
Oh, no, we don't need another Ted.
No, that is not. That's why I said I wasn't advocating to make a change or anything here.
Well, I'll tell you what has changed over the years.
The vibes after you're trying to make this a professional show again.
Trying so hard. It's done. This whole show is over.
The Billboard charts have changed over time, I think is where he was going with that. Let's talk about those.
Yeah, let's talk the Hot 100 is not the Hot 100 of even maybe 10, 15 years ago. Probably a far different animal than what would have given us the hit songs of our youths.
I would even go more recent than that. I would say within the last 6 or 7 years, it's changed quite a bit.
Yeah, just based on the eye test, we've seen changes as recently as Jay mentioned, based on the actual formulas involved as recent as 2013, as I could see. So the Billboard charts that you know and love today, or at least the Hot 100 chart that you know and love today, has gone through several different iterations, renovations, evolutions over time. And that's what we're going to talk about today, come hell or high water.
Yeah, let's do it. I have one more recent than that 2013-2014 change too, but we'll get to that.
There you go. We got some breaking news already. Let's start from the beginning of this chart. Not the beginning, because we're not going to go all the way back to 1913. We will say at least there have been so many names to this chart. My favorite was the popular numbers featured by famous singers and leaders. Very, very good name. Rolls right off the tongue. If you are into the whole brevity thing, then you may instead appreciate the name Honor Roll of Hits.
I like that one.
Easy in, easy out. But the Hot 100, as we know it by name, began back in 1958.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I was looking for my notes. Began back in 1958. Way back then, we were looking at, again, a different Billboard chart altogether, a different type of Billboard chart, something that was very singles driven. And I think that's really going to be one of, if not the main difference of the Billboard chart of today versus the Billboard Hot 100 chart of yesteryear. So maybe that's the best place to start our conversation tonight.
Sure.
In terms of... Oh, go ahead, Dan.
No, I was going to say, yes, to a certain extent, but having gone way down the road of how popular music was produced and sold to begin with anyway, that era was, that's all it really was, period. Albums as we knew it from the 50s were really legit collections of singles that were meant to be played in jukeboxes. That's literally where the name album comes from. Is that what you would get, the idea of an album of singles, and that would be all one package. So that part, the whole thing being singles driven at that point in the business makes sense, but it's not very long before that changes and record labels start to adjust their strategy so that their artists are putting together albums with a purpose. So they want you to go buy the record, not just the 45 kind of thing.
And that's what's kind of fascinating about it, is just the changes have really been kind of label driven over the years, like labels kind of adjusting to the charts, the chart changing and evolving over time, the labels kind of, I don't want to say gaming the system, but it's in some ways kind of gaming the system.
Absolutely.
Until recently. I agree with everything up to that certain point, right? Like all the way through, even back in the early 90s when they switched to the whole sound scan thing and you had to have a barcode, and all of that was very label driven. I think that more recently, the on-demand streaming services have helped boost some of the like artists' own ability to advertise for themselves. Like their like self-driven marketing can help. Now, that's not to say that the labels don't still have the monopoly, because the self-driven artists don't have a lot of clout behind them.
Right.
No, but we're and actually this gets to a point that I thought was going to be the hot take of the night, and maybe I can draw it as much as I can. But at the same time, you're also seeing things that artists without clout making that, because the chart now having that third leg of streaming, even if it's weighted differently than radio play and actual sales, it's more of a measure of what is actually being listened to, what is actually being consumed, not just, well, radio airplay is a different level, because we know for a fact that labels have long had their thumb on the scale when it comes to radio airplay, and
that's also not new though. That almost dates back to that first Hot 100 chart. In 58,
absolutely.
You're talking about
for sure,
absolutely payola and shit back in the 60s.
Oh yeah, no, and there's plenty of suspicion as to whether or not sales numbers up until the SoundScan era had the label's thumb on it. So my what I thought was a hot take was going to be that this chart now, where it has the weighting of the streaming, is actually the most representative of a chart that it's ever been as to what is actually being listened to this week, not just what is the best selling for the week.
No, I know you mentioned, like, you thought that was going to be a hot take, but
yeah.
I've actually been advocating for that for years. I mean, to myself, I don't have any actual like voice anywhere, but like, if you look at you mentioned the way singles were released back in the early days of records, and how records were like compilations of those singles. And so sales of the 45s were weighted, like there was no such thing as an album chart. Like that's just not a thing. It was all based on the singles. And I believe mid 70s or something with Elton John, Captain Fantastic would have been like when the album sales really started counting. Or like, was it a Michael Jackson record was the first album to debut at number 1.
Oh, you were correct. Captain Fantastic was the first LP to debut at number 1 on what was then known as top LPs and tapes.
Yeah, so I did some reading, but I didn't really like commit it to memory, but I thought that's what I had read.
That's why I have 2 windows open.
I should probably do that, but as you can see, I'm holding a bottle of water in one hand and a glass of bourbon in the other, so that I can't type. But the idea, where was I going with this? Oh yeah, so like the singles, as we're looking at like streaming media and stuff, that is actually a more representative number than what we were seeing throughout the 90s with the SoundScan. But there is another change that happened to go along with that streaming that is a little more concerning is the wrong word, because at the end of the day, who actually cares? But like, did you guys know that SoundScan and like the BDS like systems were bought out in 2018, 2019?
Was that the Luminate group that did that?
Yeah. So like I don't know if it was bought out, but it consolidated. all of that stuff. And what they did was they stopped weighting physical sales from non-reporting agencies. So for example, there's like 700 or something record stores, and only something like 8% of them actually report.
Interesting.
And so what the industry used to do all the way through to about just a couple of years ago was it weighted the reported sales to, I don't know, fill that gap for non-reporting record stores. And they don't do that anymore. So physical sales actually don't mean shit anymore.
Now, just to back up real quick on that point, specifically SoundScan, Luminate, BDS, just for the listeners and for my own edification, this was a system that was really used kind of at point of sale, right? As an album, as a CD was being purchased, was literally scanned in order to count the number of units being pushed by the record stores and probably other like retail centers, you know, Circuit City, Media Play, et cetera, that Jay was talking about.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you said, that's one of the key differences as to the landscape today versus, you know, even 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Like there just is not as much physical media being purchased and consumed. And as such, there aren't as many record stores or stores, period, that really feel compelled to report that.
Right. So if you're not one of the, I didn't do that math off the top of my head, but let's say 50 or so record stores. If you're not one of those 50 record stores that's reporting, your sales don't matter. They don't count toward any sort of chart, any sort of record of what that artist may have sold, but also how much a record store's doing right now.
Right. I feel like that's very, not gimmick, that's not the right word, but more niche, I guess is a better way to put it, in terms of, you know, your record store is probably going to be servicing the vinyl collecting community more than anything else nowadays.
So if you're looking for the actual numbers.
Yeah.
Sure. Why not?
Lay us on them.
It's interesting because for the third consecutive year, last year, it still grew.
Interesting. Just record store.
Well, yes. So vinyl did actually outsell CDs again.
Yeah.
But so here's the interesting. So, okay, again, we're taking notice from the RIAA.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that physical sales consisted of just 11% of revenue from recorded music.
Wow.
It still brought in $1.9 billion,
which is a lot of money. That's not to sneeze at.
No. Now, granted, obviously that tells you that's another total of nearly 15 billion just off of streaming.
Yeah.
So they're not making money off of that.
No, but that's actually a fair point. Like if you're looking at like it's 1 out of 15, right? So the ratio is 1 to 15 of what money is being made from record sales versus streaming. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the charts. So,
well, no, I think the only reason I brought the numbers up, went looking for it, was to posit that perhaps there is some way to work physical sales back in, because they're
then
going to die completely necessarily soon.
No, then I'm totally with you. But then the problem becomes, if you are a consumer of records and you are buying direct from the artist, it doesn't count. Exactly. If you are a consumer of any sort of physical media and you're buying from a store that is not reporting to Billboard, your purchase doesn't count.
Yeah.
So then if you are one of those stores, like, do you have like label execs coming in, like drug reps, like giving you pens and like notepads and shit? Like maybe you just want to push this up a little bit further towards the front.
Yeah. I would imagine somebody's got to do that, right? Like,
right. Those stores become critical. I mean, it's 10%, but 10%, as you both alluded to, could be very significant in terms of charting kind of leading to additional revenue.
And I'm guilty of this too. Like as the consumer, my go-to is I'm going to buy it direct from the artist.
Yeah. Right.
Like I'm going to go see them at the and get it when I'm at the venue. Because then I know that it's going directly to them, although that's not entirely true as well. Right. But it's going directly to them.
A higher percentage is going to them than it would be otherwise.
Right. You could say that is largely far more important than any sort of representation on the Billboard chart is going to be, particularly for the artists that I'm going to go buy a record from.
And that's another key too.
Well, yeah,
who benefits from chart exposure. It's usually not the artist, at least it's usually not the types of artists that would care whether you bought a record from their merch table or not.
Largely, I think that's true.
Yeah.
Largely. But there's always going to be that artist that creeps in at like number 95 on their thing. And someone's like, what? Who's that?
And that's the magic of streaming.
Right. Then in a week, they jump from 95 to 50.
Which is, again, significant. I mean, we don't necessarily see it. Listeners, you probably don't pay that close attention to the Hot 100 charts, at least not to that lower level. But those jumps are significant for an artist.
They amount to millions of dollars.
Absolutely.
That's the thing that can. And then it's the case of, is it just the rich getting richer because these are probably artists with major label backings, or are they, independent artists that are getting their break? And it's probably 70-30 on that one, but still it's the opportunity, I suppose, to, if your song goes viral, you may get the exposure that comes with being listed on the chart, or because now you can and that's a really interesting argument as to how much that actually means when you can say top 20 hit or top 10 hit.
I think a lot,
viral song as number 2 on the Billboard. Okay. What does that actually mean to your average consumer?
Well, that's the thing. To the listener, probably jack shit, but to the opportunity for the listener to be exposed to that music, like a tremendous amount.
Yeah. I have a unique perspective on this. Maybe not unique. It's not unique. I'm going to rephrase that. I sound like an idiot. I have a somewhat rarer perspective on this, in that I've been on like alternative rock charts for like subgenre radio stuff. And I will say that with the ability to push for, as an independent artist with no label backing, I was charting higher than Ozzy at one point.
Damn. And that's not even a flex, folks. That's just real facts.
On the secondary rock charts. Now, I can also tell you that amounted to fuck all.
Right.
So I have that perspective on it too. Like, how much does, as a consumer, how much do I care what my purchase record is going toward? But also as a podcaster, I love the charts.
And that's why I also kind of said, are we just kind of in the era where like the actual Billboard chart is more of an industry circle jerk for, insiders and podcasters, and it really does not matter because your average listener is more likely to be swayed by the Spotify top 50 than the Billboard top 50.
Right.
And there's some alignment between those two, but not
always. No.
On any given day, it's very different.
Yeah. Influenced by current events, influenced by a million different things.
But that's a fun question too. Like, if digital streaming is weighted so heavily in that direction, right? And we've seen, like, Luminate has published things telling you that it is. Why is the Billboard chart so different than if you look at like a Spotify top 50, or if you look at the Apple Music top 50? Why doesn't it line up better? I don't have an answer to that.
I don't know if that kind of goes back to the formula, the actual physical formula that combines everything into where an artist charts, the streaming, the airplay, the radio airplay specifically, sales. What is weird and what I can't figure out is that it seems to not always be the same. At least according to the little bit of research I did, it seems that there's a target ratio of the percentages of each of those things, of sales, of streaming, and of radio airplay. And that range can shift for, I don't know exactly why, but that range can apparently shift for one reason or another.
And that was a point of view that we had taken actually a couple times over the last several years, when we had songs that made it to the top 40 and were convinced that the only reason these songs were here is because there was extra weight being given to a physical sales, because these are the type of music that only people who would still be buying physical music would be bothering with, or more so people who know that buying physical music would weight heavily, so they buy it to troll it to get it higher, Aaron Lewis. So there is that, I guess, that possibility of a group of actual consumers putting their thumb on whether they know it or not. Now, the question, as you mentioned, is that formula stay consistent so that you could do that? And an artist that is not anywhere near the mainstream and not doing material that would have any shot normally getting to mainstream, but as a dedicated enough audience who will physically buy the albums in a place where their purchase can be tracked, Walmart, and therefore get an otherwise niche or song that should stay buried pushed to the top of the charts.
I think there is that kind of like smoke and mirrors sort of layer to it, that we have an idea of what goes into it. We have an idea of this artist is going to chart heavily when they release album X, but there are always outliers. There are always those kind of curveballs that come in and we're like, how did this happen? And we don't have an answer to it.
Well, and I don't necessarily mean to pick on people since he seems to have just kind of disappeared ever since then, but fucking Oliver Anthony Music was the number one artist for how many weeks? Why? How? He had a YouTube video.
Yep.
How does that happen? And I'm sure that there are think pieces out there written from all different points of view to explain how it happens and why it happens, and they're taking it as a certain ideology. And I just literally physically want to know how the numbers came out that was at that week the most listened to song in the country. Was it? How?
I'm not mad at it. And here's why. What the music is, notwithstanding.
No. That's not it. I'm not asking for this is such a piece of shit. How did it get popular? I literally want to know.
Right.
A, B, C, and D equals number one. How does what do we get there?
I'm not mad at it, and here's why. So if you go back, let's cycle back this conversation to when we were talking about the early days of the charts, and they used to do something prior to the Hot 100. I don't know if it continued into the Hot 100 days. I think they made it a separate chart. But it used to contain jukebox tracking. All right. And what's cool about that was it was, someone had to go to the jukebox, put money in the thing and choose that song. And so tracking it was a deliberate or rather playing that song was a deliberate act by a listener. And what's cool about streaming is you can track that too. Right. So it's whatever is being tracked can be, and that's where I think like that what you're talking about with the YouTube video is they were looking at actual numbers. How many times was that video played? How many times was that song listened to by individual users? Because YouTube tracks all that shit.
Right.
Because that's how they monetize it.
As of 2013 is when YouTube spins started to factor into the Hot 100. So, and
I believe as of 2018, it is weighted toward on-demand streaming, not subscription streaming like Pandora or SoundCloud, where
that makes a lot of sense.
Where it's playing random, like it's like radio play. That stuff counts, but it's not weighted. So the weight is toward the jukebox streaming services, like paid subscriptions to Spotify or Apple Music or YouTube. So when you're paying for it, your vote counts higher, right? Like that sounds stupid, but it makes more sense in this case than it does in any other.
Well, it does, because I think it's the closest thing that we've got to having a sales.
Yeah.
At this point anymore. So,
and it goes back to that jukebox medium, right? Like if I can say, I want to listen to this song at this time, I'm glad that counts higher.
Absolutely. That's so deliberate. You're not, there's nothing about that says, I don't want to listen to this song, so I'm going to pull it up and play it in my ears.
Right.
That just doesn't happen.
Which again, kind of goes back to the argument of for how long was radio airplay more weighted, which it may never have been, but do you weight radio airplay? And why do you rate radio airplay? They want to crucify Brian.
In the Red Wings Walk-A-Boom.
I mean, it sounded like a ridiculous argument when Prince made it, but it's a legitimate thing. Like with radio, like you don't control what it's playing in the air above your head. Like, but with these streaming services, you're making that conscious choice.
Right.
Yeah. And how wide are radio formats, or at least even back in the day?
That's another thing too, because I know over the years they've also incorporated more tracking from a wider variety of stations into the actual Hot 100, which is also possibly explains the explosion of country over the last 15 or so years, because there are a lot more country stations and pop stations. If you didn't know that, surprise.
Yeah.
Well, I do also think, and this is shifting topics slightly, but I do also think we're due for another update to the way Billboard does things. So the last time we saw a major split in Billboard charting was in the early 90s, right? When Boys to Men was hitting. And it was this split where they took, I want to get this right, but like the idea was that it changed because pop and hip hop had started dominating the charts and started backing out things like, or rather like grunge was starting to get popular, and like the regular old radio rock was not hitting anymore.
Yeah.
It wasn't getting on the chart. So they had to devise all these separate categories for things, which still exist. Like all of those separate charts are still there. But I do think that we're going to see, because we've had such a wait, not AIT, but EIGHT. We've had such a wait for pop, hip hop, and country have been dominating the charts now for quite a long time.
Yeah.
So I do think that we're due for another shift in how we look at things, just for the sake of keeping things fresh. And credit where credit's due, Billboard has done that.
Yeah.
Shifted the expectations and shifted what they're presenting to people based on what they're seeing in trends.
To follow fact check just a little bit, the splintering of that chart was the establishment of what was the mainstream top 40 and rhythmic airplay charts.
Yeah.
And the fun fact behind that, the first number one on both of those, End of the Road.
Yeah. Right. And
I agree with what you're saying, and because Billboard does keep adding things in an attempt to give, like, it seems like they'd be adding more charts and measuring more things would just kind of muddy the waters, but it's actually an attempt to kind of clarify more, again, to get to the answer the question, what music is actually being listened to by people.
Right.
So you have or what is popular? Well, that's why you have the Social 50 come through, and a separate hot songs for each genre chart now. Those sort of levels, or the separation between current album sales and albums overall. So again, one that's just physical sales, one that contains everything.
Right.
That level of stuff. So you completely agree that they're trying it. You're right. It's a matter of time before they kind of do another hard reset here soon.
To put that into perspective, just in terms of the sheer volume, Dan, that you were talking about, Billboard currently boasts over 200 weekly charts across all different genres, across all different delivery methods of music, and probably charts that none of us, the three of us, or any one of you listening, have ever heard of. Like, it is vast.
And honestly, kind of dumb.
Well, again, like then now we go back to the question, like, well, who is all this actually for?
Right. It's just data collection, and there's nothing wrong with data collection.
Sure.
And truly, like, again, as a consumer, like if I am alternative folk consumer, and I want to go to that specific chart to find out what is selling in that thing, like I can have that bookmarked and look at that every month. I don't think that one's weekly, but like you can look at specific charts if that's the thing you're into and that's what you want, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But how, I guess, trying to figure out how to phrase this question, because nope, it's gone. I got nothing.
Well, I mean, you brought up an interesting point that I didn't think about, that as a consumer of a very niche sort of genre, I feel like maybe the charts do offer you that sort of benefit to find music in a genre that is maybe not super popular. That you're like, oh, what are the newest hot musics? And I'm trying to look at one, and the first one I came up with is kid digital song sales. But yeah, maybe you're a parent and you're like, hey, what can my child listen to that's actually fun and new and they'll like dig?
Full disclosure, didn't know that was a thing.
No, but I mean, I can support that at like in before when I had access to a lot more data because I just had access to it as part of my profession. Like, I would routinely go through the rock charts just because I wanted to find some new rock to listen to, and the normal avenues weren't really delivering what I was looking for. So, hey, let's see what's coming up. What's catching spins now that'd be worth trying to listen to. And like sometimes it was you'd find the diamond in the rough, but still it was like an option if you were just looking for new material.
Yeah.
That can also be useful. Again, I don't know if it's the same data as publicly available as what I was looking at, but still.
Yeah, I guess that's another downside to the Billboard charts, is that at least from what I've seen, a lot of it is paywalled. So that also kind of sucks. That if you are trying to use that to find and source new music or new albums from artists that you're aware of in any genre, like I think the Billboard Hot 100 and the Top 200, which is the full albums chart, I think both of those are available in their entirety.
Yeah.
For the current week. I think even if you go back weeks, I think that becomes paywalled then.
You can go back for a while before it's paywalled, though.
Oh, can you? Okay.
Yeah.
So you get at least those major charts. I feel like you're probably going to get a little bit more run, but some of the minor ones maybe not so much. Which I get. They got to make money too.
Sure, but I mean, if you think Billboard doesn't make money, I mean, honestly, like that's a gripe that I have with them, is that they have these 200 charts and they're behind a paywall. Honestly, I didn't know there were 200 until you just said that, but they have a bunch of these charts and they're all behind a paywall. And it's like, you make a lot of money. You could probably help the little guy by making these tiny ass charts available.
And it's like, are they going to really lose much if they do that, versus the benefit that they'd be able to make?
I can see archived ones being behind a paywall. Sure.
Yeah.
But current ones, like, come on, let us look. Just a peek.
Sorry, in the process of this, and while agreeing with you, I went down the rabbit hole, and apparently all the hard data that I used to get is paywalled, but the actual individual genre charts based on airplay are publicly available.
Oh, nice. Right. Okay.
Which is kind of cool.
Give me an example of one that just like a random one, because I'm curious, because I'm selfish. I want to look at this myself later.
All right. So media bases. Let's see. Throw a genre quick.
Country. Americana.
If
you want to get more
Americana, I don't know if I can do, but let's just do the hot country. The number one song this week, according to Media Base, Luke Bryan, Love You, Miss You, Mean It.
Yeah, that tracks. Literally, I guess.
Yes.
But so at least listeners who want to find that stuff will have at least an avenue or two, to do that. That makes me feel a lot better about it.
Yeah, because I think it gives you the idea that, again, if what you're looking for is a way to learn about music numbered 1 through 40, the options are there.
Yeah.
That's always been kind of interesting too, that it's not the hot 40, it's the hot 100. But I feel like we always talk, and I don't know if that's like Rick D's fault or, who might be at fault for that. But I feel like we always talk about the 40 and not the 100.
I blame Casey Kasem.
That might be a joke, but that might be the reason, is they just, for whatever reason, decided that we're going to do this show, but we're only going to do the top 40 songs, because that most conveniently fit into the 3-hour package they were looking for. I don't honestly know. I'm just throwing stuff out there at the moment.
I'd buy it. That sounds more plausible than anything else I can come up with. And it just stuck.
Right. And I don't know why we settled on that number. Why 40? Why not 50? Why not 25? Like, we rank football and basketball. I don't understand.
Right. Yeah, it's just such an unexpected number of a ranking of a thing compared to, like you said, top 10, top 25, top 50, top 100, top 40.
There is actually, so it's, I just actually the show. I didn't mean to do that.
I Googled, so let me see if your actually is what it was.
Well, I was going to say, it seems likely that it is the Casey Kasem effect. And that is that America's top 40 is based on what we could fit into the arable package. And the reason I think that is actually because of the live Harry Chapin record, where he comments that his songs were too long to crack the top 40.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you cut out the long distance dedication, you could squeeze in like 2 or 3 more.
I mean, that's fair.
Easily.
In everything I see, there's the common theories are it has to do with the length of a radio. Like, they were trying to do a countdown and doing it in 4 hours, and that was the only thing. The way to do is you get 10 songs an hour, yada yada yada. And the other one just has to do with the old capacity of jukeboxes. So you get 40 songs in the old jukeboxes. So it was the 40 most popular one hit in the jukebox.
All right, if we're sticking to the jukebox thing, then I'm here for it.
That's something. Either are plausible. They both make sense and probably have, like I said, have a logical reasoning behind it. Not just, we only feel like doing 40. Apparently, they do 50 in France though. So that could be why we don't do 50.
Surprised we don't try to do more.
Yeah. That's a fun conversation as well, and not one that we're going to have any amount of time to do tonight, but just how charts differ between the US and other countries, because I think that would be a really interesting deep dive.
I think we had the germ of an idea to do that at one point and kind of look at a year and figure out like what the most popular songs were on the biggest charts and kind of talk about that. Maybe that is something. We just pick a random year and look at what's the song of the year in a bunch of different countries. I don't know.
Did we have that conversation way back when we did a deep dive into the Divinals?
We might have, because it's like the example of a case where you have an artist who is extremely successful on
Australia,
in their home country charts, that we have no idea, and you dig into it. Like, that's actually kind of fun. If you want to have some fun, go back to the Triple J charts and dig through, and you're like, okay, about 50 to 60% of this is pretty familiar, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that is, Australian, New Zealand, Southeast Asian in general, that is popular over there that just never gets exposure here.
Yeah.
Despite the worldwide platform that music is now.
To fourth wall break real quickly, we did discuss the possibility of having an awards based show, exactly like what you were talking about. So not necessarily the charts, but like who won Juno Awards, who won like the Mercury Prize, the Nordic Music Prize, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we could go either way with it.
I think the awards is a much easier conversation to have.
Sure. I think so too. We'll put a pin in that one. Maybe let that one marinate a little bit.
Yeah, you might be hearing that in 2025 is right there. It's right around the corner.
Now,
Jesus. Well,
it is.
I think we are going to be right around the corner here pretty soon. But before we wrap this one up, just one more question to kind of put a bow on this that I posed to both of you. And I think, Jay, you alluded to your thoughts on this at least a little bit, but what do y'all think will be the next major evolution of the Billboard Hot 100 charts?
That's a really good question.
I can give you mine at least to give you
let's hear what since you had thought of the question, so you had time. You go first.
It's not, I don't know if it's an answer I like necessarily, but I feel like we are going to start to see, and we're going to see this in a lot of other areas besides music, but the concept of a human created song versus a song created or partially created by AI. I do feel like, I don't think we're there yet, but I do feel like we aren't very far from that being a consideration for the Billboard Hot 100 charts.
Like an AI generated chart.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that comes before. Yeah, for sure.
I think you're not wrong, and I think there's probably going to be a place soon for that, and it will be, there will be heavy resistance to that.
Yeah,
so
I
it would
hate it.
not be included in the Hot 100. It would be a separate chart of its own. Which, again, honestly, that's counting it as its own separate genre is probably the best way to deal with that without like having to deal with the big questions. Like, 30% of this song was generated by AI, so it goes in this chart.
Well, that's what I wonder too. Like, are we going to have a thing where we have a song that is so popular that it just can't be denied? And then we have to have the conversation.
Well, we kind of started that. There was that song earlier, wasn't it earlier this year? That was a new Drake and Kanye song. Was it Drake and Kanye? It was somebody who put a song out and it started a chart before the artist sued. Like, no, that's not me. That was an AI generated voice.
Oh, wow.
Put your thoughts out there. I'll see if I can find that. All right.
It's too hard. I do think that's going to be I agree, Zach. That's going to be a difficult thing to weigh in on because it's going to be really hard to tell.
Right.
We're gonna have to be real vigilant. Our artists are gonna have to be real vigilant in saying that ain't me.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a thing of disclosure, but what if an artist just doesn't disclose it?
Right.
Today, there's no ramification for that. There's no requirement even for that.
Yeah. I hate what my brain just did where I was like, was that song a certain artist? It was
Why was it Meatwad though?
No, because I can't actually do Shaggy. It comes out as Meatwad.
You've got to go get him out of the booth, although he's just going to float there saying, do what now? Yo, Wad, get out the booth. You're done. You're done. You're done, Wad. Go.
Show's not supposed to go like this.
I don't know if I want to bring it back on the rails. I'm not sure.
Let me just say it was the song I was thinking of. It was in 2023, and it was an alleged Drake and Weeknd collab that was completely AI faked and pulled down after racking up hundreds of thousands of spins. So yeah, it's a thing we're already working with.
Yeah.
I will say.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. You're good. It's not going away anytime soon. I think that's definitely it's a problem. Like, I think we're going to have to be real vigilant about that, mostly for the sake of the artists than anybody else, because Spotify already does stuff like this and Apple already does stuff like this where, like, they have entire playlists that are generated by not artists, especially if you're looking for, like, background music or whatever. It's all fake. Like, the artists listed are not real people. But I will say, though, that I am looking forward to, because of that vigilance and because of all that, I think what we might see, to go back to your original question, Zach, about like what evolutions we might see next, we might see the paid subscription streaming services become the sole medium for the charts.
So just radio airplay just cut out altogether, you think?
I would say, and physical sales, for better or worse. I do think that it's probably the truest form of that jukebox pick. Even truer, actually, because as we pointed out earlier, the labels did have some influence over what got put into jukeboxes. So that deliberate going in and putting in your money and paying for it becomes more real on the paid streaming services like Spotify and Apple Music and whatever, that it's a truer form of what's being listened to. And I don't hate that idea, at least not right. I can't think of a reason to hate that idea right now.
No. Yeah. I think that's probably the most logical to a certain extent, because I mean, physical sales are what physical sales are. Radio airplay is what radio airplay is. And I think we're going to see that phased out and also kind of shuffled off to their own separate things. Like, these things still happen. Mm-hmm. These still exist.
Yeah.
But they don't represent anymore the actual pulse of the music scene. So we're just going to kind of separate those out. And if you want to know what's still hot on radio, that's still an option.
Yep.
If you want to know what still is moving move an actual vinyl, that's still an option. But like those are going to be level B, and the level A stuff is going to be streaming driven because that's what people literally are actually, like you said, they're making the choice to listen to.
Yeah, and I'm not like leaving physical sales into the mix. I think is not a terrible idea, but like you've got to actually track what's being sold.
Yeah, that's
like,
the problem.
You can't use 8% of the
right.
of the stores. Like that's not a representative quantity. You have to go all in, or it's not worthwhile. Like 70% has to be reporting.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, I like that idea a lot. I really do, because like you said, it is anyone who is listening to music and they're at school, in their car, in the coffee shop, wherever they're at, more likely than not, it is going to be on demand. I don't want to say more likely than not. That might not be a fair statement, but a lot of times it is going to be on demand. And those on-demand spins are going to be very representative of what that person wants to listen to, which is the purest measure of what everyone wants to listen to.
Yeah.
So I'm with you.
With the caveat that we may actually see things come back to the chart that have been gone for 10, 15, 20 years. If that's what's weighted more heavily, nostalgia may reign supreme.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you could, add a release date function to the whole thing, but like,
sure, but
I don't know. There's got to be a way to do it. Is all I'm saying.
Hey, I'm here for the chaos, so I say just let it fly.
Hey, always chaos first.
Always chaos first.
Mariah Carey will be number one for always.
Well, yeah, that's a thing.
I know.
You're that's definitely a thing.
Oh, well, boys, I think we finally got through this fucking episode. And I'm so happy.
It's a shame none of it will be listenable and
details.
We nerded out a little hard on this one.
I think it was good though. I think it was still very conversational. I think if I was listening to this, which I am going to go back and listen to it, I think that it would be interesting.
I will probably have a hard time going back and listening to it because I'm sure I sound like a jackass.
No, I do not think that whatsoever. I think that y'all being in the industry, in varying degrees, and I'm not putting it in air quotes to denigrate, I'm putting it in air quotes because there's a lot of the industry that y'all have been a part of. I think that y'all both have in really unique perspectives. And I think, at least for me, I almost had to stop myself from being a listener and be like, no, you have to participate, Zach. You are one of the hosts. You have to say things and words. Yeah. But no, y'all killed it. And listeners, you killed it as well. If you stuck around this long for any episode, if you stick through to the end, then you are the 8% of listeners whose sales will be reported to the SoundScan or Luminosity or whatever it's called.
Luminate.
Thank you. That's the one. I think Luminosity is like a meditation app or something.
Unfortunately, the listeners will have to self-report because we don't have a service to do that for us.
We don't. We're not on that one.
That is true.
How do they do that, though?
That's a good question. Yeah, listeners, if you would like to tell us how you feel about any of the Billboard charts, how they have impacted you, if you consume them, if you have any idea of who's on the charts, if they guide your listening, we would love to hear how they intersect with your musical habits. So let us know on all the social medias at Fairly KickAss on TikTok, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter. At fairlykickass.com. There's no ride-along playlist for this episode because we didn't really talk about any specific songs, but most episodes will have a ride-along playlist. You can get there from fairlykickass.com. You can also get there directly from Spotify, I think. You can search for Fairly KickAss and you'll get there. That one I'm not sure of. Put a pin in that. Just go to the website for now, and if you can search for it, then let us know and tell us how our stuff works, because we clearly have no idea.
No clue. Nope.
No. And then if you like what you heard, wherever you're listening to this podcast now, you can listen to more of it there. And anywhere else, if you prefer listening to it somewhere else, wherever you get your podcast is where you're going to find us. So just search for Fairly KickAss and you will get this episode. You will get all of our previous episodes, and you will just have a jolly good time all the live long day. Parting words, boys, on the Hot 100s before we get out of here. Long distance dedications, anything?
Dan, you do a pretty decent Casey Kasem if you had something locked and loaded.
Is this the time where I tell you to keep your feet on the ground and keep reaching for the stars?